heard anything that you said. Still on mute?
Sorry. Yeah, there we go. So my apologies. Yeah, welcome everybody to this session, which is entitled Water Users and Water Quality, Cooperative Actions to Achieve Improvement. This session is dedicated to really understanding the state of water within Europe, and in particular, the efforts that have been taken to address those challenges. And we have an interactive session that will involve a number of presentations from a variety of people who will, in the first instance, I will provide an overview of the situation related to water quality in Europe. Then we will have some examples of the kind of things that have been done to address those problems. And then we will have a group of panelists who are talk about this issue from a different perspective. And we're very, very happy to have this group of panelists. I will just share the opening slide so you can see the session here. I'll just get it open and get up into this one here. The inevitable technical glitches, but there we go. Yeah, as after an initial statement that I will provide on the sort of overall situation related to water quality, we will then have Sophie Tremblay from the TNC, who will provide these examples of things that have been done and are examples of activities that have been involving cooperative efforts to improve water, particularly utilizing nature-based solutions. Then we will have, as I've indicated, people that I would identify as interest groups. This term created some difficulty with some of the speakers, and I understand that, but people who come to this issue of water quality from different perspectives. Mr. Deinlein from the International Association of Waterworks in the Rhine Basin, who will speak about his perspective. We will then have Dr. Thomas Kulik from the German Association of Chemical Industries, VCI, who will provide his perspective about the issues related to water quality and the directions that we're going in. And then Mr. Dominic Gattel, who's Director for Water for Veolia, a company that is active in a variety of different countries in managing water services, wastewater treatment, who will provide his perspective. And finally, we'll have Eva Hernandez Herrero, who is the coordinator of the Living European Rivers Initiative of WWF, and who has been engaged in one of the key sectors affecting water, and that is the agricultural sector. Just to begin, this session is organized by my own organization, the International Association of Water Service Companies of the Danube Catchment, which is an equivalent organization to that of Mr. Deinlein for the Rhine, and the ICPDR, which is the River Basin Commission for the Danube River, but also the ICPR, the River Commission for the Rhine River Basin, and Tabea Soto is on this call here with us. Our colleagues at WWF, Andreas Beckman, who you just heard, and TNC, who have been active in this issue of building these kind of partnerships. And these organizations have been a part of creating this event and making sure that we're able to convene this event. So with that, I would get started with the activities, and really very, very briefly on behalf of not necessarily my own organization, which is, as I've indicated, IAWD, but essentially collecting information from the two river commissions, but also the international or the European Environment Agency on the state of waters. And I'll just give you a very brief set of statements about the status of water in Europe, which is important for us as a starting point for where we are and what we need to do. This particular report is probably the most important one that you can find related to the status of water, because it gives an overview based on the legislation that we're all utilizing in Europe, the European Water Framework Directive, which is clearly one of the most innovative instruments in improving water, both for Europe, but I mean, it's I think a model that can be used in other parts of the world. But the important lessons out of that are that the status of water has not reached the level that we wanted to have achieved. And the deadlines for these activities are the year 2027, where the different measures, the different actions need to be taken. And I will show a couple of slides from the Rhine, which indicate how quickly we will be able to get to the good status that is intended under this legislation. But the issue of groundwater has, I would say, advantages in some sense, because there is a better situation related to groundwater than there are perhaps for the surface waters. As you see, only about 40% of the surface waters, rivers, lakes, and coastal areas are in good ecological status, and only 38% are in good chemical status. The issue of chemicals is a critical one in terms of water, and for water service companies like the one that I represent, this is an important issue. We will see, though, that there are a number of individual substances that are a particular problem that create, for some water bodies, these difficulties of reaching the good status. There has, in the work that has been done over the last period of time since the legislation was initiated, been some improvements in the status of water bodies, but not perhaps as quickly as that we wanted. And both the factors that are causing problems with water are ones at a European level. You see in the last bullet point there is hydrological or hydromorphological problems, the alteration of the river structure, diffuse pollution, and particularly from agriculture, and we're happy that Eva will talk about this, but also atmospheric deposition, and in particular the substance mercury, which is a problem for the chemical status, but also point sources and then water abstraction. These issues are in a general sense, the picture is in Europe, but I would just very quickly provide you with some facts that the colleagues at the Rhine Commission have provided. I mean, the Rhine being a river that is much more intensively inhabited than perhaps many other rivers, that the water supply out of the Rhine is important, and Mr. Deinlein will talk about this. And it has the added factor of having very significant navigation. And related to the chemical status, these are draft classification systems, but you see on the left-hand side the status related to the chemistry that is based on that red means that it's not in the condition that it should be. And that is a picture that emerges not just in the Rhine, as we'll see, but in other areas as well. The reason being because one substance that is problematic, or if there are one or two substances, that automatically kicks this classification system into a not satisfactory condition. And the expectation and hope is that that situation improves, but it is clear that the chemistry criteria under the Water Framework Directive are critical in determining the status. And in a general sense throughout Europe, as I've seen shown in the previous slide, that is an important factor that is affecting the situation. You see that this means that a number of the water bodies then are not in good condition, as the pie graphs that I've just put up, and that fortunately the limited data set that is indicated in gray there is being reduced over time, and that there's been much more work put on this. But this is important in terms of understanding the status of rivers and water bodies in Europe. Overall, the achievements within the Rhine have indicated that there have been important improvements in water quality and ecology. But because of the issue that I've just raised that we can talk about in the context of this, is that, and this is the presence of some particular substances, the actual classification system has not necessarily changed. And that is this one out, all out principle, that if there is one factor that does not meet the criteria, then the system is not considered meeting the goals of the Water Framework Directive. Specifically, though, there are existing deficits in habitat diversity and ecological continuity, and slow reaction to ecological measures. And I think this is one of the lessons from the presentations I heard yesterday, is that the status of rivers changes much more slowly in many instances than was anticipated. But as I've indicated, the groundwater status is, in a general sense, very good. And just to emphasize for everybody on this session, the public participation process on these Water Framework Directive, the River Basin Management Plans, is ongoing now, and everybody's active involvement is important. That's the outlook, that there are anticipated in the Rhine significant areas which will not meet the criteria that are anticipated. But there has been, as I indicated, significant progress on certain areas. The similar situation exists in the Danube, although different because of the circumstances of it. And these are the two, I would say, larger river basins in Europe. And there you see the picture of the Danube, which is, as you're all aware, I think the most international river basin in the world. These are the factors that were identified in the Danube as key pollution problems or key issues that needed to be addressed: the organic pollution, the hydromorphological alterations, which most of the other sessions have dealt with, nutrient pollution, and hazardous substances pollution that are affecting the status of the river basin. In general, the picture is similar to that of the Rhine, although the chemical status situation is slightly better, and some of the other factors, the good conditions, are improved. What all of this has is not just a matter of pie charts and numbers. It has consequences on living systems, and WWF in its work has shown out that living ecosystems are threatened, and species in those ecosystems are threatened and affected by the situation that exists. And they see on this slide the decline of the number of species through the various factors that have been identified in the work of the river commissions and under the Water Framework Directive. And this is the direct consequence of the situation related to water. This session is targeted at, okay, the fact that water itself is affected and influenced by a number of factors. It's not just one, it's multiple factors. It's navigation, it's agriculture, it's hydropower, it's water services need to be involved, both the water supply, water, wastewater side of it. And there are natural areas that are having many instances positive effect, and we are dealing with the challenge of climate adaptation. These sectors need to work together and provide, I would say, frameworks for addressing these problems and utilizing the governance arrangements that exist. And our colleagues at OECD have provided us for this presentation this slide on the water governance principles, which are largely being used in Europe. And I think in the sessions yesterday was highlighted is that the technical solutions are one part of the issue. The other is the water governance issue. And the take-home messages for today are that there are improvements being made. And this is oversimplifying all of what has been said and what is existing. But the actual meeting of the WFD goals is not a very optimistic picture in all the river basins. And that we need an accelerative effort to meet those goals, the 2027 targets, using the tools available under the Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy. And with that, I would say thank you and stop using my slide presentation here and turn to what is the purpose of this session, is really to engage in the dialogue between the different actors and to have a little bit of setting that. And I would turn now the floor over to Sophia Tremolo for providing a presentation on positive examples of what has been done in terms of addressing the situation related to water quality and getting this combined interest together. So Sophie, if you can share your slide and yeah, there we go.
Good. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Philip, for this introduction. So I'm going to present today take the findings of a recent analysis that we conducted on one specific aspect of pollution that you've described and one particular set of solutions, which are nature-based solutions to address surface water quality issues. I'm Sophie Tremolo. I'm the Europe Freshwater Lead for the Nature Conservancy, which is a global conservation NGO working on aspects of freshwater in the context of our twin objectives, if you want, of addressing climate change and tackle biodiversity. So the presentation is structured as follows. We will first have a very quick reminder of what nature-based solutions are, identify how they can help address surface water concerns in Europe, and identify particularly specific places where they could make a difference building on that, we will discuss what is needed to make the investments in nature-based solutions at scale happen, building on specific examples that as Philip described. So nature-based solutions, as you know, has been defined by the IUCN as actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems to address specific social challenges, societal challenges. And here we're looking at, in particular, those that can enable water security to be delivered, which is defined as a provision of an acceptable quantity and quality of water for health. So dealing with water-related risks, but also quality being one of these key risks. Why do we care and why do we want to boost investments, if you want, in nature-based solutions? Is because they can provide benefits not only for water security, and a lot of the TNC work has been focused on identifying how NBS can contribute to maintaining or improving water quality, particularly with respect to nutrients and soil erosion, so sediments flowing into the water. But they can perform a number of other functions and also contribute to climate change mitigation by being less demanding on cement and energy, so therefore reducing greenhouse gases and helping with carbon sequestration in soil and in trees. But also help with climate change adaptation. And I think that's why we have framed our work in the area of resilience, because as the EU EU climate adaptation strategy demonstrated, there's a clear link between climate, increased pollution and soil loss, which are going to mutually contribute to each other and increase the impact of climate on water pollution. Other benefits are linked to biodiversity and jobs creation, which is of course one of the key concern under the EU resilience and recovery strategies. So in this area, TNC over the last 2 years has published a number of reports, one of which was looking at what has been the experience so far in investing in nature for European water security and what have been the barriers to scale. So you have a link to that overall report here, which identified that the context in Europe is conducive, but there have been limited examples so far of doing this at scale. There has been some interesting initiatives, for example, in the UK, undertaken by water companies, which have been working with farmers in their upstream catchments in order to address water quality issues. There's been a number of other initiatives which I discussed yesterday in my other presentation, but this has been relatively limited. So what we did in the subsequent report was to identify specifically where nature-based solutions could contribute to address surface water quality issues if deployed at scale. You have touched upon the surface water quality challenges, Philip, in your earlier presentation. Obviously, hydromorphological pressure is an important impact on rivers, but diffuse pollution is also one of the outstanding challenges. And one that is less well known is that of soil erosion. We found that approximately 11% of the EU territory is affected by a moderate to high level of soil erosion, which is affecting biodiversity in the rivers as well. So when we conducted that analysis, we have used a methodology that TNC has deployed in a number of locations elsewhere globally, but also in China, in Africa, in India, where we're looking at how cities in particular are affected by surface water quality challenges linked to pressures in their upstream catchments. So really looking at how this impacts on the ability of water utilities and municipalities to deliver clean water, and therefore making the link between water delivery at city level and what happens in the catchment. Why do we do that? We want to do that to demonstrate that there is an important role that water suppliers can play jointly in collaboration with other entities dependent on good quality water to invest in improving the catchments at scale through nature-based solutions. So the type of nature-based solutions that we usually consider in our work throughout the world, in the US, in Latin America, in Africa, are here. We organize them in terms of protection, restoration, management, and created habitats. And in Europe, we've focused particularly on 4 types of nature-based solutions, which we think that if adopted at scale, could deliver impact. We conducted, however, this analysis to identify where specifically this could work, because these are part of the solutions, they are not all the solutions. So there needs to be a selective approach to identifying where they can work. So for an analysis, we had to select a sample of 109 cities that are particularly impacted by surface water quality. They're dependent, if you want, on surface water for their resources. And we find that 63 of these 109 cities show that there is a high feasibility potential for at least one NBS and one pollutant type to have a significant impact on their delivery of services to 42 million people. These cities are dependent on healthy catchments. Many European cities in the late 19th century, early 20th century, had to go out of their boundaries to get access to water. So they built long sort of aqueducts, or sort of had to really reach out into the catchment in order to access water. But there has been a heavy development of their catchment, so their conversion to artificial or agricultural land, which limits the ability of these catchments to provide ecosystem services to these cities and therefore clean water. Many of these pressures are linked with agriculture, and Eva will have the opportunity to go into more details. So we've done a very detailed analysis of the catchments on which they depend based on where they get their water from, demonstrating the link between cities and their catchments. So these are a very brief snapshot of our results. It's a little bit sort of biased in the sense that we looked at sort of NBS by NBS in isolation. But what we found is that agricultural based management practices could be effective in more than 50% of cases, particularly for sediment reduction, and would be by far the most effective solutions. So here is cover crops as one of the flagship, if you want, agricultural best management practices, as opposed to other type of NBS. It's not to say that riparian buffers or forest protection has no role to play, but this is a role that would need to be combined with others, and is often very limited at sort of field scale, but at scale will have limited impact in the cases that we examined. This is showing the same results, but on a map. So this is distinguishing between where NBS can have potential on reducing phosphorus and where they can have potential on reducing sediment, soil loss. And you see that, for example, in the south of Spain, or in areas with heavy agricultural activities, there is a high potential, whereas in other places we found that the potential was limited. So this is a guide for potential utilities operating across the continent, or financiers which are looking for projects but do not necessarily know where to find such projects to invest in nature-based solutions at scale. So what will it take to make it happen at scale? We think it's important to have this kind of prioritization, not only in the third river basin management plan, so to identify what the place for NBS will be, but also, as I said, for large-scale water users or corporates that are engaging throughout the continent. It's important that they identify where they could make the greatest impact in terms of investing in such solutions. Making it happen will require establishment of collective action mechanisms. Usually it's not one actor alone that is impacted by these problems, it's multiple actors. So it's important that regulatory and planning framework allow these kind of mechanisms to happen, and to enable also water service providers to lead on the establishment of such collective action mechanisms. In our work throughout the world, we work on a particular model which we refer to as water funds. We've established 41 of these water funds across the world, and this is usually initiated by downstream water users, such as water companies, that face issues with the way in which the catchment is being managed. So these water funds enable channeling payments, payment for ecosystem services, if you want to call them like that, to restore and to invest in such NBS at scale upstream in the catchment. But establishing those mechanisms requires defining a clear plan, a prioritization plan at a smaller scale. I've just presented results of a large level prioritization, but then once you do it, you need to identify where NBS would be most cost effective in the basin. And then requires also establishing governance mechanisms so as to pull different streams of funding and ensure monitoring and accountability for these solutions to be in place. So we are working right now in the UK, in Norfolk, on the establishment of such a water fund, jointly with Anglian Water, which is one of the water utility in the UK, which has been very progressive in this area. WRE, which is a regional planning platform across the whole of East Anglia, and Norfolk, which is a county council, which is a local government, working on defining a plan of prioritization to address not only water quality, but also intra-year flow variability, with an emphasis on NBS, which are linked to agricultural best management practices. Some of them have been deployed in the county, but in a disjointed manner. So the plan will identify where it's best to invest, and will also enable multiple actors to feed into this plan, including private sector investors who might be interested in doing so. So mobilizing funding is critical, as I said, and it will depend on having good information on effectiveness and cost effectiveness of these solutions. There is limited information at the moment. The results I showed you were based on sort of averages or sort of data that is not sort of location specific, so that needs to be firmed up. And that will also require measuring and reporting on outcomes. This is an area where there's a lot of work being done in the UK at the moment through the regulators, of what the Environment Agency. That's an area of work where the US has been leading the way as well by defining, for example, total maximum daily load of phosphorus that can be discharged in a given basin. So that sort of sets out an overall outcome that effectively charts a path for the collective action mechanism to deliver results. And so there are examples where this has been done, but I would say mostly outside of the EU, and there's still quite a lot of work that can be done to not only have them in the Water Framework Directive, but to use these indicators as a joined up, as an outcome indicator that drives coordinated implementation. So thank you, and this is my contact details also of Nathan Karras, who is a senior freshwater scientist who worked on this analysis, and Anna Favero, who worked on the report as Europe Water Security Policy Officer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and I think you've done in a very short time a very good job of highlighting, I think on the one side, the necessity of cooperation between sectors and how this can be organized in the kind of instruments that you're talking about, and is, I think, a very good complement to the presentation of Ms. Manfredi yesterday, who really was appealing for this kind of use of funding instruments. And I think, if I understand correctly, the European Commission wanting to make resources available for perhaps some of these issues. The river commissions themselves are also a place where the dialogue on this happens or can happen. Although I think what you've indicated is maybe it needs to be more the urban-rural connection that needs to be met, but it's extremely a good basis of the conversation that will happen. What I would like to stress is two things at this moment. One is there is a chat box that you feel free at any time now to put comments or statements that you would like to make in the chat box. Please don't wait until the dialogue. This particular session will have over half an hour of direct moderated dialogue that will happen at the end, so that there will be an opportunity to address any questions that you're raising. But importantly, I mean, Sophia has given a number of good publications, documents. We will put in the chat the links to those documents that you can then find those resources. And one of the purposes of this symposium is really to spread information on good examples. And this is extremely important for us. We will, in the course of the next speakers, identify certain documents. The European River Memorandum that the River Commissions have put together will, I think, also be posted in the chat, and which Wolfgang Deinlein will talk about. So please use the chat for that purpose. That's what it's there for, to facilitate the dialogue. With that, then, I would turn it over. What are the purpose of this now was to have an exchange between people who are coming at this issue from a different perspective. And we have, as I've indicated, a group of panelists who are going to be able to do that. We've asked each of them to provide a sort of an opening 5-minute statement that allows their perspective to be clear. And the first of those is Mr. Wolfgang Deinlein from the International Association of Water Companies of the Rhine catchment area, which is, I can say from my own organization, the Danube, the forerunner and the model of water utility companies coming together in a river basin perspective. Wolfgang, we will turn the floor over to you. We'll just get your presentation loaded up. If I could ask Amelia to put the presentation up, then we will turn the floor over to you, and you can start speaking, but the presentation will be up hopefully in a second here.
Thanks a lot, Philip. Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation to speak and present the perspective of waterworks in the Rhine Basin. I would like to give you an inside view of our perspective, which is quite different from the official figures that Philip showed before. And I would start with the with the next slide, please. Only the only the slide. I see.
I think I think Amelia, is it possible for you to change the display settings such that it's just the slides then? Yeah, exactly. Swap presentation.
Yeah. Okay. I start with
She's got it there. Yeah, there we go.
What I wanted to talk about. Yes, first of all, I would like to say that drinking water is we're not an interest group, because drinking water is interest of everyone. It's including the interest of everyone on this panel also. Everyone on this panel has the same interest to have clean drinking water. Maybe the ones who have children have a higher interest, because it's what the children need as well. And drinking water supply is a core task of every state, but this has been outsourced to companies, public companies, private companies, and these companies, they cannot do drinking water protection. That's very important to understand. We are dependent on the polluter to stop polluting, or the state to fulfill its protection task. And for many years now, we've been calling for measures to stop pollution at the source of pollution, and quite unheard. So my conclusion now is that this basic interest is being neglected. And it's not only a universal interest of everyone, it's also a direct interest, because only oxygen is more important to the human body than drinking water. Drinking water is more important than food. And if you look at groundwater, the official figures are fine, but we are deeply frustrated because we see groundwater is for every water supplier, groundwater is the preferred source, And the main polluter is agriculture, and we are calling for a change in agriculture for nutrients. The nitrogen problem is addressed in the Water Framework Directive, but not the pesticide problem. That's much bigger. I would like to show you now. First of all, we strongly advocated for a redirection of the Common Agricultural Policy in the EU, the CAP, and to protect drinking water. We actually did what Veronica Manfredi yesterday proposed. We did media coverage, and also went to the public and recommended a European citizens initiative called Save Bees and Farmers, which needs 1 million. We are still not there. And the reason why we do that is, one example is Switzerland in 2019. Overnight, there was a pesticide metabolite discovered. It's the metabolites of the pesticides that are the problem, because they are mobile and they reach the groundwater and can reach drinking water. And it was the chlorothalonil, which was discovered all of a sudden, and a lot of metabolites, and they are found in the Swiss drinking water, and they cannot meet the Swiss drinking water limit values anymore for 1 million Swiss. And Karlsruhe, where I come from, we have also discovered this metabolites, and a couple of others also. So this shows there is urgent need, because once it's in, what can we do? We can install reverse osmosis in this case, but this would be the last resort. And yeah, I don't go into the details. I would like to talk about the pesticides, metabolites iceberg. It's 288 pesticide substances, including metabolites. It's 3,000 substances, so monitoring of 3,000 substances is not possible. We should be able to make targeted tests, but this is not possible because we are not provided. The data are withheld from us, and this is the case in a lot of other cases. When once polluted, groundwater resources stay polluted. That's the important thing. And if we go to the next slide, the thing is, please, yes, we have a chemical iceberg that is much bigger. We have 100,000 chemical substances, and one single substance can be enough to make drinking water unsafe to drink. That's important to understand. And as I said, upscaling drinking water treatment is no solution if you have a long-term view. And we now see persistent substances that just keep accumulating in the environment. And when they pass the threshold, the limit value, they will be above the limit values and stay there. And if it's mobile substances, they reach drinking water resources. And this is a multitude of pesticide and residues and chemical substances that are emerging at the moment. We see a lot of unidentified substances, a lot of unknown substances, which we cannot tell what it is. And they're very often hidden behind business secrets, like permission discharges, all for pesticide approval. And to unite our voices in this desperate situation, I would say, we did the European River Memorandum together with IAWD. Thanks for the invitation, and others, including Meuse and Scheldt and Elbe, including Brussels also. And we released 10 theses and target values. And in the Rhine Basin, 64 substances were above these target values. Next slide, please. Last slide. The conclusion is that there is a number of severe problems for drinking water ahead. And when the problem is we need to take care and regard the precautionary principle, because once we're above the limit values, we will stay there. And this all is exacerbated very much by climate change. There's a double shortage of clean water. And the way out would be the European Green Deal. But we are very, very frustrated by the outcome of the CAP, and especially frustrated and even shocked by the German Council presidency in 2020. And it looks like we have 8 more years until we can change agricultural policy for what we need to protect groundwater. And it's the same thing with others, with the chemical pollution that is addressed very much in the chemical strategy. We very much appreciate what the European Parliament says on this, and also the Rhine commitments. So there are positive ways forward, but they are not, well, it will not be a success if the member states don't support it. We have positive examples to conclude in the Netherlands, where the discharge permits are revised every 7 years now, and the biggest Netherlands chemical site, Chemelot, is now monitoring for single substances, because we are looking at the single substances and not at some parameters, how it is the case in most of the, or in a lot of discharge permits. That's not useful for us. And they're also aiming at a closed production cycle, which is the way to go according to the Zero Pollution Action Plan. And also we need organic farming. That's what we were promoting. And it's proving that it is possible to make organic farming without pesticides. And in Europe and in the EU, we don't have a growing population. So it's possible to make a shift, but the cap even drops the funding for the, no, it doesn't drop, but it make it shorter, the funding for organic farming, which is a tragedy. So hard words, but yeah, let me be clear on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. As I say, we'll have a chance to have an interchange on this. We want to get the perspectives of the 4 panelists right from the start, and then come back to a dialogue on some of the issues that have been raised. If I can ask that the panelists do stick, if they can, to this 5 minutes, because it's we want to have the dialogue, as I say, both with yourselves, but also with the other panelists. That would be very helpful. If we could now turn to Dr. Thomas Kulik from the VCI, which is the Vereinigung von Chemieindustrie in Germany, the German chemical industry. Mr. Kulik, the floor is yours. And we will, Amelia, if you could put up the slide then for.
Okay. So first of all, thank you to give me the possibility to give here a short statement. And if you can just skip to the second slide. I knew it is very difficult to be in the 5 minutes. So I just start with my things I like to tell you. Water, the treasure of water, was always a clear subject for the chemical industry. All the production sites of the chemical industry were founded nearly 150 years ago. It's a great rivers. The rivers has been always a transportation rule, navigation. Philip, all the things, yes, are relevant for us too. The water is always a supply of raw material. And Mr. Deinlein, you are right. Next slide, please. We are also take the drinking water for the workers at the site, but we also need it for the production. And in Germany, we are also, as a chemical industry, we are producing drinking water for communities like Leverkusen and Leuna and other cities. So yes, drinking water is a subject for every human being in Germany and Europe. This is one of the reasons the chemical industry made great efforts for the reduction, for one hand, for the amount of water we use, and also for the released substances over the years. Heavy metals, I think mercury is still a problem from historical pollution, but mercury, phosphate, and other things are diluted. We have a discussion about the organic substances. But in any case, the chemical industry is committed to a sustainable use of water resources, and what we achieve is an improvement in the water quality in Germany. Next slide, please. This slide is nearly the same, Philip, that you've shown. In Europe, we have the problem that the Water Framework Directive only gives the opportunity to have a good or not good status, and mercury and other pollutants make it impossible to show the improvement. And when you are looking at the maps from the past, but the quality of the water is getting better every year. and the pollution decreases over the years. Next slide, please. We don't forget, please, that the chemical industry provides substances for modern living for all of you. We are all using the products of the chemical industry. We are producing cleaning agents. Someone of you perhaps wash your hair, take a shower. We are producing food additives. Perhaps someone of you prefers sugar-changed lemonades. Especially in the Corona time, a lot of hygiene products, disinfections are provided by the chemical, especially the pharmaceuticals, also with Corona vaccine. We are producing plant protection substances. Mr. Dahnlein give an idea of what are the problems with these products, but also these products help to feed the world. This is another aspect of the subject. We have a modern application like electromobility, and be sure that every application has its own fingerprint in the environment. At the end of the day, next slide, please. And this is the reason in Germany, the German Environmental Ministry set off a trace substance strategy for trace substances in the aquatic environment. And we made great efforts to fix substances which are really relevant for the environment or to the drinking water production. We made great efforts to inform the public to the right use of our substances. For example, please do not dispose old pharmaceuticals in the toilets. This is really a problem that a lot of people just dispose tablets and other things in the toilets. We are developing concrete measures to reduce the intake of substances in the aquatic environment, and be sure there is no zero. This is an ambition. At the end of the day, we always will have trace substances in the aquatic environment. And this is the reason we also have to discuss whether we can have further treatment of wastewater in municipal and also in industrial wastewater treatment plants. Next slide, please. And this is the last, and I hope the 5 minutes are not so far away. The chemical industry is always committed to a sustainable use of natural water resources. This is clear. This must be clear. On the other hand, we do not have in Germany, and I do not know the situation in other European countries, but in Germany, we don't have problems with trace substances at the national level. What we have are local problems. Especially Germany has more inhabitants. We have areas with weak and small receiving water bodies and a lot of people in the surrounding. And yes, these are regional problems. And if there are regional problems, we have to look at this local problem and we are looking for solutions. This must be local measures. In any case, the chemical industry is always interested in a constructive dialogue on substances, especially in substances that may cause challenge, especially to drinking water, but also will perhaps cause damage to the environment. So thanks a lot, and I hope 5 minutes is a short time. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you very much. And indeed, yeah, the 5 minutes is available just to get started, but we will have time for dialogue further. But I think you've done a very good job of giving the perspective in the time frame available. We would now go further to our third speaker, which is a representative of a company that is operating worldwide, but certainly in Europe has its roots, or at least significant activities. And to turn the floor over to Mr. Dominique Gattel, who is been engaged with the Veolia company in a number of the activities, I think, associated with trying to find solutions for these kind of issues that we're dealing with, the protection of water, but also the provision of water services. So, Mr. Cattell, the floor is yours. And Amelia, could we get the slides up? And again, if you could hold to the 5 minutes, it would be great.
Thank you very much, Philip, and cue me in case I would take more than 5 minutes. And thank you for this very enlightening seminar. I mean, I feel very privileged to be invited to take part as a panelist. I definitely endorse this need for cooperation, and but this turnaround is not simply technology; it's also societal. So this is why a collaboration is very much needed. I can reflect from our operation in various countries, but I really want to share with you some thoughts, as I think these cooperations always involve 4 bodies minimum: the public regulator, the site owner, the operator, and the civil society at large. You have here a beautiful picture of the Sinopec petrochemical site out of Beijing, China. I take that as again, a very telling example where the regional authorities are concerned with the Dachi River quality, and they've imposed to that petrochemical site less than 30 ppm of DOC in the discharge water. In other words, it's better than the river quality itself. Veolia happens to be the water utility operator there, and we've offered to the owner of the site to walk further by landscaping 8 hectares of wetlands and install a phytoremediation system. And the park is built to really enhance the biodiversity with different habitats, and it now hosts black storks, kingfishers, and some IUCN ready species. And it has opened to the public since last year and already welcomed 500 visitors. But you don't have to travel that far, I mean, to be that big. I would just tell of a little example in Thionville, France, where a biodiversity zone was created downstream of the municipal wastewater treatment plant on 2 hectares, and now it's host hedgehogs, ducks, storks, etc. And it involves. It is important to mention that it involves the local league of the protection of animals and local academia and schools. As operator, I mean, what are the commonalities between these projects? And again, there are several in Europe. It starts with a regulatory approach, and I think there is a good reason for it, because the public authority has the legitimacy to broker the dialogue and the debate and set the targets. And that's, again, initial regulatory approach sparks the wisdom by all actors, being they public or private. I think 2 features are essential to mention there: the use, setting, and monitoring of KPIs, and the public information. It doesn't come as a surprise, but I think it's extremely important, and all the earlier presentation today, I mean, show the importance of these KPIs and public information. The second dimension I wish to stress is the organization of territories to deliver. I take an example, which a number of us are already working on these days, is the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which is probably the most impactful instrument in terms of preserving the freshwater quality. Thank you very much. Yeah. Because it forced, I mean, the beauty of this instrument, it forced the territories to organize themselves to be able to deliver, and that's absolutely paramount. Of course, this needs visionary local elected people without whom nothing happens. And I again want to stress that because it hasn't been tackled this morning, not much. And it based on that willingness of local territories, it becomes possible to walk the extra mile to do better and broader. A hard point I'd like to also bring to the table.
Dominic, somehow we've lost your sound.
Maybe your microphone is muted.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, excellent. is the ratio between the surface of the catchment and the river flow, which I mean drives more or less what are the potential actions. In other words, I mean, if you have a small catchment, I mean, it's relatively easy because of this land ownership regime and all that stuff. Also the governance to be relatively quick in terms of the action. Otherwise, that needs more legislative instruments. I think in terms of returning to this urban wastewater treatment directive, which goes under revision these days, it happens to be, appears to me that it is really the rule book for managing at least the urban freshwater environment. And I think there is a lot more to be done under the revision of that directive. For example, to better manage stormwater in terms of flow regimes and quality, and address all urban runoffs and their polluting effect on the freshwater environment. Relying, it's been mentioned several times today, on nature-based solutions where applicable. Also calling on to reusing of treated wastewater, which has a number of collateral beneficial effects. I do not dwell on the chemical, on the treatment within the urban wastewater treatment of the chemicals of emerging concerns, and also the need to homogenize at European level the notion of sensitive areas. Finally, one last aspect. I think there is, and probably, I mean, we've, seen that today already during the conference, that I see a silo, two different silos. You have on the one hand side the environmentalists and all the body of legislation which helps them through, and you have the operators which have their so to say sectorial directives, and all efforts that can be deployed to bridge the gap between the two silos, so that operators get an interest into environmental protection, and equally environmental protection of offices and bodies getting interest into the operations will be beneficial for all. This is it for me.
Thank you very much. It's actually good closing words, and certainly part of what we wanted to see in this session is where those points of dialogue or conflict are that need to be addressed, and I think also particularly examples of what can be done, that such as those that Sophia then showed us. So thank you for that. The final statement then we have is from Eva Hernandez Hero, who is, as I indicated, with WWF, and has been working on the issue of the cooperation with agriculture. And Eva, if I can turn the floor over to you and ask that you provide your at least initial statement. I've just put in the note that there are opportunities. After this statement now, we will have a moderated dialogue. So please put any comments you have or questions in the chat, and we will then take it up from there. So Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this session. I think the opinions being put on the table are very interesting. Before I start with my two ideas, I would like to make a comment. I cannot avoid it, because every time I hear that the one out, all out principle of the Water Framework Directive is making maybe the things more difficult. When we go to the doctor and he tells you have diabetes because your sugar is very high, we don't say, oh, no, I'm healthy because the rest of my parameters are okay. No, it's the same with rivers. If one parameter is not okay, then the river cannot be considered healthy. And this is what the Water Framework Directive is aiming at, is the full health, the good status of our rivers and wetlands and groundwater. So if one thing is not right, it cannot be right in a map. However, it doesn't hinder us from putting more data on the table and showing progress, because there has been progress made, and we can brag about it, even if and we can be proud of the progress that has been made. We can see that many rivers in Europe have changed, that they were fully polluted from industrial pollution, and there has been a huge change in that. But when we come to agriculture, for example, and I come to my point, diffuse pollution is a great problem. The main problem is that we cannot treat it in a water treatment plant, and as much we can maybe aim at compensating the pollution from agriculture, increasing the water treatment in the plants, which is shifting the cost of the treatment or the cost of the impact towards another stakeholder. No, that was not the cost, the direct cost of the pollution. As Philip mentioned before, 38% of water bodies across the European Union are suffering pollution from diffuse sources, most of them from farming. We know that farming is a great source of pollutants, but the good news is that it can also be part of the solution. No, and that's what I would like to talk about, is how by working with the farming sector, we can actually move forward and benefit both the sector and the rest of the society. I think working with farming should be done in two dimensions. One is the farm level, and this is maybe what has been mostly developed until now. Organic farming was mentioned before. I think we can even go one step beyond organic farming, and we can go into agroecology, or let me call it nature-based farming. We have good examples. In WWF, we have been working with Edeka, with the German retailer in the Guadalquivir Basin in Spain, in the citrus project in orange farming. And we have reduced chemical consumption in our orange farms by as much as 80%. I mean, it makes a huge difference, both for the cost of the farmer, so it is already a win for the farmer, but also on the risk of those agrochemicals reaching the groundwater or surface water. Just by working with nature, fostering natural pest predators and improving the quality of the soil. Also, better farming can reduce water consumption and reduce the concentration of pollutants in the environment. I mean, the dilution principle, quite basic, but it's true. I also wanted to know that it was mentioned that on average, the groundwaters across Europe are doing fine in terms of quality and quantity. Well, average can be very dangerous because we have many cases. If we go, the more we go to the south of Europe, the higher the risk for the quantitative risk for groundwater. So at farming level, we can improve farming practices. We can also have a farming that is compatible with the landscape. So that takes me to the second dimension, not only the farm, but the system, the landscape. We can have farming that helps recycle nutrients. We can have farming that is flood compatible. And that is something that we are doing, for example, in Hungary, in the Tisa Basin. We are working with farmers and with local communities to reinvent flood-compatible farming. So farming that not only helps reduce flood risk and increase water retention, which benefits farming in itself, but that also retains and benefits from the nutrients coming from the river. I say reinvent because flood-compatible farming was probably the origin of farming, capturing the nutrients from the water. Has been done for centuries, and now we thought we could live without it, and we could solve the nutrient input into our farms just by synthetic fertilizers. If this is a win-win situation, I think it is, because what benefits the society can also benefit farming, can reduce the risk derived from farming, and it's not only the physical risk of too much water, too little, or polluted water that cannot be used for farming. It's also a reputational risk, and that I think that is very relevant when you talk about reaching the markets. So if this is a win-win, why is it not yet widespread? Well, I think it's basically because there is no reward for the farmers that deliver societal benefits and no penalty for those that hinder them. But where could the incentives come from? Well, really from three sources. One is subsidies and taxes. Two is markets, and three, investments. I don't know if I have one more minute to go through them, Philip. Very quickly, common agricultural policy was already mentioned. We don't have, well, it is what it is, but still there is a lot of room for the member states to implement it the way they want to implement it, and we can have public money for public goods. We can have this 1/3 of the EU budget redirected into helping farming to shift to better practices and to compensate them for eventual losses when they have to intervene at landscape level, when they have to leave part of their land to restore the natural functions of floodplains. Let me remember that 60% of European floodplains are occupied by farming land or farming-related uses. So if we want to restore these floodplains as a key element in nature-based solutions for water quality and also for climate change adaptation, we really have to work with the farming sector and compensate for these losses. On the other hand, on the other side of the subsidies from the Common Agricultural Policy are the taxes. No, we have the polluter pays principle, but we are not very good at implementing it. So a green taxing system would tax agrochemicals that would punish that are too generous with the use, and comparatively benefit the more careful farmers would be a benefit for the society. And in a similar way, the proper implementation of the cost recovery principle from the Water Framework Directive, with which the price of water is proportional to the damage done to the water bodies. Besides subsidies and taxes, well, we have the markets. No, the markets can be a huge incentive for changing practices. Right now, there are many labels to recognize best farming practices. Not are easy to understand by the consumer, but for sure, they are recognized and being used by industry or retailers. These certification schemes have evolved with regards to water, move beyond criteria that value the lower no use of agrochemicals, and they get into the efficient, sustainable, and legal use of water. But still, and I think there is room for improvement in this sense, there's one step that has not been taken. It's to recognize when a farm is compatible with natural processes. So the processes that keep the planet working, no? Water infiltration, diffuse pollution filtering, flood buffering, or nutrient cycling also. The last element would be the investment. I mean, we cannot pretend the farmers to do the investment themselves. We have to attract investments, think at landscape level, not only at farm level, invest in nature-based solutions, integrating farmland in these nature-based solutions. Working together with farmers, authorities can invest in projects like constructed wetlands, as we are doing right now in Finland, for example. And this project can also benefit from CAP funds or from rural development programs, but they can also become a source of revenue to make them bankable. This is something that was also discussed yesterday, know how to finance the restoration of our rivers. This can also work for water quality. And when we are talking about a sector that is making revenue, then it should be relatively easy to find a way to make this restoration, this improvement of practices bankable and subject to be financed by private investors and reach this 1 trillion euros redirected towards a green economy that the Green Deal is aiming at. So to wrap up, this current framework is pushing farming down a risky road for the sector itself. But when the sector is given the proper incentives, support, and regulatory framework, can really become an ally in improving the health of our rivers.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists. What I would like to do is really open this up, and I think you've all given very positive statements on the issues. I can say from my perspective, there's a couple of different themes that have emerged, perhaps slightly different than I actually maybe thought is, but one of them is this, and I would first actually like, Sophie, if you could just quickly respond to the question of this link between farming and urban areas or urban communities and this the funds that you're looking at, the extent to which under schemes that you've been involved in, whether that has been possible to incorporate, in addition in the protection of water quality from the point of view of drinking water, as has been talked about. So if I could ask you to do that. But the two other areas that I think have been highlighted that are important is many of these things being not just an individual facilities point of view, but on a river basin perspective. And I guess here, the river commissions are a bit challenged in how you can operate as a forum for the kind of dialogue that does seem to be needed between agriculture and other, well, ecological services, but also water services as well. And the extent to which you can offer, meaning these dialogue forums at either international level or national level for cooperation between sectors. So if I could just ask Sophie, if you could just quickly respond to the statements that you've heard and whether the application of the kind of solutions that you're looking at can be addressed in both of the contexts, particularly that you've heard from the other panelists.
Hi. Yes, I mean, I think if I understand your question correctly, there can be payments, I mean, effectively payments from city users, water users, in order to support the adoption of these best agricultural management practices, right, that Eva was referring to. And she As she mentioned, there is a bit of a tendency to focus on the farm scale, but we need to move to a more landscape scale in order to be able to attract this financing. So examples that have taken place already include, some of these UK companies that I was referring to, but there it was mostly the tariffs that are paying for these engagement with farmers. They have a teams of sort of people who can work with the farmers to get them to switch their practices on pesticides or on metaldehyde, for example. That's been the case with Anglian Water, so that they can reduce the cost of the treatment further down. There's been a lot of efforts done by Wessex Water working on nutrient management in the Poole Harbour, which is again mobilizing funding from the water users, downstream water users, into the upstream catchment. We had last year a sort of landmark decision or authorization by the European Commission to enable the city of Paris, Eau de Paris, the municipality, to continue funding the farmers they've been supporting in the catchment area of that serves the city of Paris, where they had been doing it, but with support from the Agence de l'eau Seine-Normandie, and the European Union has de facto authorized payment for ecosystem services by agreeing that these are not subsidies per se, but are real payment for ecosystem services, and therefore can go to support these interventions at scale. So we're seeing some initial signs, but there's a lot more potential for that, and also the need to engage not only water companies, because otherwise there's a risk that they would all be the only ones having to pay for these activities, which are benefiting a range of actors in the catchment. So where these collective action mechanisms come into play is to ensure that, yes, a water company can contribute, but you can also pull in any subsidies and grants that might be available to a range of actors, and also corporate contributions from other users, such as agribusiness, for example, that may benefit from that, which is what we're doing in Colombia, in other parts of the world where there are some users that are directly benefiting from these actions and are investing in these funds.
No, thank you for that, and I share also your sense that it cannot just be water companies, that it needs to be perhaps a more multiple benefiters ability to sort of secure the financing. I see in the chat there's been a number of good examples. I am very, very happy that this is the case, and Wolfgang Deinlein, I think, has put an example in now, EFA. Is there any questions or comments that any of our non-panelists would just like to address? As I say, the session actually turned perhaps in some sense a little bit more broad, because I think there are a number of threads that could be followed. And we have now 15 minutes, I guess, or just over 15 minutes. And I think it is useful that people continue to do as they're doing, because we want these sessions to be able to share experience. I would, though, if there's not any particular comment or question, is maybe turn back to the question of our two colleagues from the Rhine who have been dealing with these issues. The perception of the value of the Rhine Commission or that kind of body as a place for dialogue and addressing these issues, both in terms of putting forward positive examples, but I mean, there are different perspectives between organizations such as the VCI and the water utility associations. And Mr. Kulik, maybe if you could provide a couple of comments about your perception of the role of the river commissions in this facilitating the kind of dialogue we're talking about.
In any case, International Commission of the Rhine is a place where the different stakeholders can talk, and I think it is clear that we have a lot of usings of the River Rhine. We are talking about floods, drafts, navigation, industry uses water. There is there's preparation of drinking water, and this is the job of the competent authorities along the river to compare these interests of every group. And sometimes it's very, very difficult. I think everyone thinks, okay, drinking water is important. Yes, it is important. But when you are talking to the people who have bird protection sites, they won't see anyone in these areas. This is a forbidden zone. There is no one can go inside just to take a glass and look at the birds, and this is everything. And so I think it's this is a platform to give an exchange, and to give the possibilities to find a good way to handle the problems which are there. We have.
No, thank you very much, and I have a sense from Ms. Manfredi yesterday, you have a very good president of your association and somebody who is very familiar with the instruments available. And it does seem that the Rhine could be a very good laboratory for perhaps using the instruments under the Green Deal for some of these activities, which you have been over the years. And I think I've heard other presentations. Mr. Deinlein, did you want to comment at all on this, the Rhine Commission, or the Commission as a forum for this kind of dialogue, both for the agricultural side and to protection of water, but also as just generally in terms of the cooperation? And then I have a comment directly from Andreas Beckmann.
You're on mute, Wolfgang.
Wolfgang, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In the meetings of the Commission and the plenaries, there are no representatives of the agricultural sides.
Okay, so this is perhaps an area, and I think it is, I would say, for all of us, and Eva, I think your work sounds extremely positive in that regard, is direct dialogue with farmers, ways of ensuring that the agricultural community is perhaps better involved. I know from my own experience on the Danube, this sector is one that it is difficult to find the dialogue partner, I would say. Although companies like Coca-Cola, who are relatively important in terms of, say, sugar beet or these kind of crops, are having potential for influence. Andreas, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I'm just a bit hesitant because I can go off on a rant pretty easily on this. I mean, this whole agriculture issue, I've already started doing this in the chat. I mean, it's been around forever. I've been in this business, so to speak, for the last 20 years, and every 7 years, the possibility comes around for a reform of the CAP. There are good Commission proposals, and then the Council stops it. And you know, we made good progress in the Danube Basin on point sources of pollution. The real key problem is that the non-point sources, and it's not just the pesticides, the water quality that was mentioned, but also just the hydromorphology, so the ecological quality as well. I mean, what it does to the floodplains and so on. I think it's one of those central issues. You know, how do we tackle that? Like you said, it's difficult to do because of the structure of the interests in the industry, because you have what you know, the Coca-Colas, you've got retailers that are buying from a lot of small producers, and the small producers are the ones that's very, very disparate, and therefore difficult to engage with. And so you really need to have a political approach to that. And there, I think the reality is that we continue to have this legacy of social, political interest, economic interests from whatever, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, when 30%, 40%, 50% of the population was connected with agriculture, where we had the memory of the Second World War, and we needed to produce secure food. We're not in that situation anymore, but we still have the same social, political, economic hangover, in a sense. The connections to political parties which continue, which have no connection anymore to the reality. There's what, 3% of the population in most countries are connected actually with agriculture. So economically, it's much less important than it was, but still, it has such an important role. And it's, again, it's not just about biodiversity, it's water quality, but also climate change, increasingly important as well. Yeah, that's my rant. I don't have any answers, but it's just point. To underline this is a really important question.
Yeah. No, that maybe I can ask Mr. Gattel. My understanding is that you as a company have been applying these nature-based solutions. Have you been working with the agricultural community in some of your operations in the way that Sophie then mentioned, these kind of river basin arrangements? Has that been a strategy that you have employed?
Absolutely, although it's very limited for all the reasons that were rightfully mentioned by a number of other people, including Andreas. So there is, yes, there is a number, but again, I mean, your fingers are enough. I mean, if I just take my country of origin as an example, but your fingers are enough to count the positive examples, which means that's already something. And how can I say that? I think there remains a strong difficulty in engaging into the political dialogue with the even at the basin level. I mean, when it's very funny because when I see, I mean, at the basin level, the farming sector is represented, and I mean, how can I say that their contribution to the basin dialogue is very, very defensive, and how can I say that they position themselves as a victim and a legitimate beneficiary of the subsidies. And it's very, very hard to sort of nurture a culture of better dialogue and movement into, how can I say that, a more environmental friendly practice. In the very basin where I live, I mean, very recently, well, not that recently, but anyway, we found again atrazine in the rivers, and I remember, I mean, talking during a dinner, a very informal dinner, and the local farmers say, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Atrazine doesn't exist anymore. Come on. I mean, atrazine was found in the local river, which means something. And so this is the sort of situation we're dealing with. But we have a limited number where, because the basin, that's the point I was pointing towards. When the basin is small enough and supply one specific city, then the dialogue, I mean, starts on a good basis, because in a way it's a one-to-one negotiation. I mean, it is within reach. When the basin is too large, etc., then more, how can I say that, systemic tools and incentives are to be installed.
No, thank you. It's triggered a number of thoughts from people. One, I just would like to draw to your attention in the chat, I think a comment from Tabea, if I'm not mistaken, on the ICPDR's activities. But I do have Mr. Deinlein wants to make a short comment, Eva then, and Thomas Kulik then as well. And this is the challenge of virtually doing it. I'm having to juggle the different things, but if I can give the floor to you, Mr. Deinlein, if you can make just a short comment, and if the comments now can be relatively short, because we will want to see if we can wrap this up in a couple of minutes then. Go ahead.
Thanks. What you mentioned is the dialogue and the roundtables, and I have been seen that the trace dialogue has been mentioned by Mr. Kulik, and what our experiences are is that these dialogues, at least in Germany, they don't bring us any further, because there is no real sense of understanding that there is a real problem with trace substances or micropollutants, and I have put a link in the chat that illustrates very much that there is a real problem with trace substances, and it's quite ubiquitous. For instance, PFOA, the substance, has now a limit value, a guiding limit value from the European Food and Safety Agency, which is almost impossible to reach for waterworks. That's what I'm talking about, that we are all of a sudden confronted with a new substance that we see that it's impossible to fulfill. And the discussion has already been opened to say, well, drinking water, we have to accept a certain risk that's associated with everything. And it's kind of a natural risk, but it's not. It's a man-made risk if you put pollutants in the environment. And my fear is that what I've already experienced is that the discussion leads to a point, like I say, where it's about, okay, we have to accept a certain risk associated with drinking water, and this risk will be more and more going up, like the thresholds and the limit values also. That's the big fight, is also all the time to have the limit values keep, but as soon as the waterworks passes the limit value, the waterworks starts engaging for higher limit values. So we are on the same side as the polluter.
Thank you. And I fear we're not going to resolve the challenge in this dialogue, but it is good that at least some of these issues are on the table. I would like to give the floor to Eva quickly. If you want to, I suspect on, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, it's going away from what Wolfgang was commenting, but was commented before on the cap, that it comes back every 7 years and we don't manage to do much out of it. I think a big problem that we have is farmers cannot be put in the same box, all of them. There are many kind of farmers. The problems that we have is if farming is a Gauss bell, no? And we have the laggers are unfortunately representing the sector. We have a big bulk of farmers that they just struggle to survive every day, and that's their main problem. And then we have few front runners. I think it's key to work with those front runners on the ground. And as Dominique was also saying before, we need to implement things on the ground. We have to show that things can be done in a different way, that farming can be profitable in a different way, that it can benefit the farmers and the society. It's not a war against the farmers. It's moving farming into the 21st century. We are still in the 19th. That's my feeling in many cases. So yeah, it's just that the discussion at the political level is with the laggers, and the discussion on the field is with the front runners. We have to take the front runners to feed the political discussion. I think that is a key challenge that we have right now.
No, that's actually a very good point, and thank you for making that, because I think in essence also good examples like such as Sophie showed of where things can happen and making sure that we can present those to people, or examples of the kind of situation that you've described. We're running unfortunately out of time here, and it's been clearly this dialogue has triggered a number of thoughts and I think things that are, I would say, I won't say unresolvable, but I think there probably does need to be some targeted dialogue at some of them. Mr. Kulik, you had a short comment I think you wanted to make to flip back to the chemical side of things, if I'm not mistaken. If you can make a short comment, and then I will wrap up the session if I can.
Yes, I hope I'm fast. Mr. Deinlein, you are right. There are no farmers in the International Commission to Protection of the Rhine. They are not there. But we are talking about our products, and I think the products is right, but are good. But the problem is that 70 to 80% of the findings of plant protection substances and so on are caused by misusing. What is misusing? When you apply these substances before it begins to rain, when you have an overspray to small rivers, ditches, and so on. And this is the reason why I spent a lot of efforts to education to the farmers, what we call in Germany good agriculture practice, just to avoid these misusings. And I hope at the end of the day, the problems we have in this areas will get smaller, like the other problems with chemical pollutions are getting smaller over the time. And they are not riding, they are getting smaller. When you're looking to the 70s, we have had much more problems. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And all of you, thank you. Because I think this session has highlighted, yeah, that we are not where we want to be, but also we have some challenges that we need to continue to work on. But I think you've also showed in these statements that you've provided that there are some positive examples of the kind of things that have been happening. I think the overall situation in Europe is that we should be pleased that there is a water framework directive, that it has moved us in a certain direction. But I think we are also seeing some of the limits of that. And it is the case that there is further efforts needed. I hope we can utilize some of the tools that Ms. Manfredi then talked about yesterday, and the institutions like the World Bank that are clearly seeing both the issue of water quality and protection of water as an important issue, but also connected to water security in a broader sense, climate change affecting the availability of water simply. There are a number of issues that have been triggered by this session, and I would really like to thank all of our presenters for your comments that have triggered. If there is a lesson that I have out of this session is that the dialogue cannot be over. We have to continue it, and as I say, I think in the chat, there were a variety of different comments that were made of places where that could and should happen, including, I would think, the river commissions has been pointed out, but also direct dialogue, and then perhaps reaching out to some of those sectors that are not as actively involved. And as Eva has pointed out, perhaps working particularly with those front runners, those people who are at the forefront, who we can create a basis of dialogue and moving forward. With that, I would like to say thank you very much to all the presenters and commentators here in this session, to thank you all for participating in this session, and to make the commitment that the European River Symposium is intended to be a continuing dialogue and opportunity for us to have exchange and to develop solutions together. And hopefully over the next number of years, we can continue in bringing progress on these issues of ensuring that water quality is improving and that we do have this cooperation needed amongst the different actors involved. So with that, I would turn the microphone over to Andreas, who I think has announcements about the break and the follow-up sessions.
Yes, for all of us who've gotten worked up about the issue of agriculture, we can go on to the next session, which is sustainable agriculture and water management towards new synergies. We can do that by staying in this this room. I'm just double checking. Yes. So again, at 12:30, 30-minute break, sustainable agriculture and water management towards new synergies. Or you can go to the other session, the other room, that is room A. There is a link in the chat. Yes, developing policy and planning of river continuity restoration in Greater Europe. So enjoy your coffee, your break, your lunch, your schnapps, or anything that you'd like to take, and look forward to seeing you in half an hour to continue the rant. Thank you.